Well, thank you, Sarah, for being on the show and welcome. Now, I know you're in New South Wales and you have two teenagers there at home who are homeschooling due to lockdown. So we may experience a couple of little hiccups in terms of Wi-Fi, but we're going to, just keep on going. And before we start though, you are going to acknowledge the custodians of the land. Now, this is something that we do in Australia. I know we have a lot of international listeners, and Sarah, if you could do that, and we may just add a little note after that, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
We acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first people of this land on which we work and live. We acknowledge your past and present suffering. We value your cultural wisdom, and we will listen to and learn from your voices. We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, both past and present.
Oh, that is beautiful. And for our audience overseas, this has become customary here in Australia to acknowledge our custodians of the land. And I think this is something that all nations can learn from. We are not the first people, and I think those that came before us and are still here must be acknowledged out of respect. And yeah, I think what you said it all.
Yeah, and acknowledging the past trauma that, quite frankly, we have inflicted.
Yeah, and in some lands more than others continue to inflict.
That's right.
Yes.
Anyway,
okay.
Thank you very much for having me here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure having you. No, I'm so very grateful because we are going to talk about performance anxiety. And I think before we start on that, you're at home. You have two teenage children who are homeschooling. There is a lot of anxiety in general anyway. How are you going at the moment? If you want to share how long you've been in lockdown for, and I know it probably may continue for quite some time. We don't want to say that, but...
Yes, but it's probably the truth. We're in week 7 of lockdown. It started at the very beginning of the school holidays, just in time for all plans to be cancelled. And I was pretty confident we'd be back at school first week back, but unfortunately cases have escalated and continuing to rise. I mean, we're coping okay because we're lucky in that we are all pretty busy, which makes things easier. I think the people that are out of work and that have lost that meaning and purpose are in a much more difficult position than families like mine.
Absolutely.
I'm also lucky that I have teenagers. I do not have toddlers or people, young primary school people. So I'm still able to work. My husband's able to work. And a little funny story about my 13-year-old son, for PDHP, he was told he had to go outside and video himself kick a ball. So he set up his mobile phone on the umbrella stand, kicked the ball, it rebounded, knocked over the umbrella stand, broke the umbrella stand, shattered the screen on his phone. But that's pretty much the kind of supervision my kids are getting.
Oh my gosh. Irresponsible parents.
But,
you're fired.
But we're fine. And I mean, one of the differences in this lockdown in where we're living at the moment is whilst it does look like it's going to be for some months yet, we are allowed to exercise with one person outside our house in the same LGA, local government area. So I've just been encouraging everybody in the house to go for a walk or a run or a cycle or something with someone that they do not live with at least once a week. And that, I think it helps us all.
Yes. You know? Yes. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. I usually go for a walk if we go into some kind of lockdown. We've been fortunate where I am in Queensland. We haven't been through what some of the other states have been through, but getting outside and getting fresh air, getting some vitamin D,
Yes,
having that one other person to connect with, it is the best thing. And that is what helps me get through lockdown. We
that's
call
right.
it ISO. And I have found my mojo in ISO.
Yeah,
And that's what I need to do. And I just say to everybody that you have to find something that's going to keep you sane and
you
keep you
do.
going throughout that time.
Yeah,
Now, Sarah Marshall, you
yes.
are an experienced performer. You are a music educator. Other than being a wife and a mother, let's learn a little bit more about you and how you have come, your journey into working in performance anxiety. So, who is Sarah? Is Sarah a singer before a performance anxiety coach, a psychologist? Let's learn about the human behind the coach.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's taken quite a long time to get here. Is probably when I always have loved to sing, like most singers. Did a lot of singing at school, not because I think I sounded beautiful, but I could sing louder than anyone else. But I also, but I used to get terribly nervous, like absolutely shaking like a leaf backstage. Never knew if I was going to throw up or sing first. And the first 5 minutes in musicals, I can never remember. Like I presume I did the right thing because no one ever told me I didn't, but I was that flooded with adrenaline that I just, yeah, I really have always been quite severely impacted with performance anxiety. Not that it ever stopped me performing, but
Mm-hmm.
but um, it meant that I didn't do the best performance I could.
Yeah.
And um, and so then I went, I left school and when I actually was a flautist in school. I just sang in shows because I could sing loudly,
Mm-hmm.
but I was a flautist at school, and I knew I wasn't good enough to be a professional flautist because you have to be above brilliant to do that. So I went to uni and did a double degree in psychology and music, and then promptly forgot about the psychology element, which I largely did to keep my mother happy, if we're being frank, because
Oh,
she
okay.
was a university lecturer. She was head of the physio school for Sydney University.
So no
And
pressure.
no pressure, no. And so she was very concerned about me doing music, as like, where is that going to take me? If you can't be a
Mm-hmm.
professional flautist, what are you going to do with it? So,
Mm-hmm.
hence the double degree in psychology. And then I promptly forgot about psychology, worked in arts management for the Australian Chamber Orchestra for 5 years, and for Michael Edgley's Circus. That was a lot of fun.
Wow. How
and
cool.
Yeah, and so I got to see a lot of people backstage and their behaviour. And I suppose because nerves have always been a thing with me, I was really interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
And but at this point, I started learning singing. When I left school, I had my first singing lesson, and I continued with those lessons and started doing amateur shows, largely opera, which because I was a bit of a music geek in
Mm-hmm.
terms of classical music. So
Yes.
that was what I found. And I have two left feet, Marissa. Let's be frank here. No one was ever going to employ me in music theatre. And so I
At
worked,
least you're
and
honest.
it's so true. Anyway, so I did, and I at the time my last year at the ACO, I was dating one of the violists in the orchestra, and
Mm-hmm.
he pointed out that if I wanted to pursue singing, I actually needed to leave the orchestra and study singing full time. So I went back to the con and studied singing and did first a postgraduate diploma in opera. And there were only two of us in the course, so we had to get on with each other. But it
Wow.
provided miles of opportunities because there were only two of us. So we got all
Mm.
these leads and it was
Yes.
fantastic. But then there wasn't anywhere to go. And so, meanwhile, I got some work at Opera Queensland, and then I got a callback audition to Juilliard. So I got to go
Wow.
and spend a month in New York, which I was completely unsuccessful at. I might point that out,
Oh,
but I,
okay.
I got as far as a callback. I spent a
Mm.
month in New York having singing lessons, did the callback audition for Juilliard Opera Centre, but was unsuccessful with that, came home. And meanwhile, my singing teacher, she had basically was concerned about people like Helen and I who weren't really ready to perform professionally but needed more training. And so she had developed this Masters of Opera Performance. So I then did another year, which was lovely. And then I went on to perform with Opera Queensland, moved to Europe. I gave up performing. I did a whole lot of teaching and a lot of adjudicating and examining. And then about 2014,
Yes.
my husband got very unwell.
Is that the boyfriend from the
No, we broke
So-
up. He's now happily married in Melbourne with several children, and we still speak. But
Right.
yes, no, I married somebody completely different who's not a musician.
Okay. I just wanted to clear that up. Okay.
No, so anyway, so he got very ill, and I was looking at ways to extend my skills beyond teaching singing. And I also had two very small children at the time. And so I sort of had this epiphany. I don't often have epiphanies, which is why I remember, is that I could actually use this long lost 4 years of psych training and do a master's in counselling and psychotherapy and actually combine this master's of performance with this master's of counselling and all my psych training to work with musicians. I had never intended to work with the worried world, or because musicians and performing artists is where I'm comfortable. It's what I know.
Yes.
And,
yes.
So that's how it all started. So I went back to uni, did the masters, and then started initially working with high school students, which is what I have spent a lot of time working with as a singing teacher, running workshops, helping them, teaching them the things I wish someone had taught me back in high school, so I wasn't shaking like a leaf backstage and could actually perform more confidently. And from that, then I started, when I first started this, I rang 11 schools and 10 said yes, they wanted me to come.
Wow, that's incredible.
I know. So I'm thinking there's a real need here, but there's only one of me. And I don't want to be employing other people to run what is essentially a psychoeducation workshop. So whilst a lot of it is information and directive, you still need to use that psych training to find out what the issues are in the room and how you can best deal with them in a safe way. So it's not the sort of thing that's easy to train somebody else to do. So then I developed an educator's course, basically, and started talking to the teachers about how they can create an environment that reduces performance anxiety, because there's fewer teachers than there are students. And so whilst I still work with students, I suppose my passion in some ways has become music educators and drama educators and dance educators, because if we can change the system, that is, and educate, because most people, sorry, I'm sort of talking in circles, but most of us were not taught this stuff at university and at school, and all these programs, they teach brilliantly the mechanical skills of performance, but they do not teach the cognitive ones.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
And the thing is that just like we are all unique, and we come from a myriad of personal experiences, and our brains work differently to each other. So what your teacher might say, look, just imagine the audience naked. I cannot tell you the number of times people told me that.
I've heard that one.
Yeah.
I'd be more traumatized.
I know. Who wants to imagine an audience naked? Not me.
Yes. That's not a good look, people. Put your clothes back on.
That's right. And other people would say things like, just go out and show them. And that works for some people. But for me in my 20s, where my self-confidence, frankly, was really not great, that didn't work. It didn't gel at all. And that's one of the that's one of the reasons I believe that cognitive skills haven't been taught, is because it's not a, any program where they've sort of adopted a cookie cutter approach. Everyone should do this. It works for a percentage of the group, but not for everyone, because we are all unique and we are
Yes.
all different. So
Yes.
I sort of go into these workshops with this truckload of tools and ideas of what I might talk to them about. And then the first question I ask them is, if you could change anything about your performance, what would it be?
Mm-hmm.
And then I try and work and then I ask them to describe the worst performance they've ever had and the best performance they've ever had, to try and nut out what is falling down,
Right.
and so I can then, yeah. And so
Okay.
that's, anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you right there, not being
Okay.
rude. I have one comment though before I ask a question.
Sure.
I bet you're glad that you listen to your mother now.
I cannot tell you, when I told her I was going back to uni to do a master's in counselling, oh, it was one of the happiest days of her life. I kid
I
you not.
bet.
She was so
No.
excited.
But as a mother, you go, oh, yes, I know. I'm full of good advice. Now, okay, before we go any further with all of this,
Yeah.
there's a couple of things that you've talked about, and we are all unique. We all have different things going on in our heads. Our experiences are different. I started performing professionally at 15, and I found myself in front of hundreds of people at my first gig. And I don't really remember the first gig, but I know I was nervous. And explain to me then, what is the difference between nerves and performance anxiety? Because I'm sure we all feel a little nervous.
Okay. Yeah. Look, nerves and performance anxiety really are the same thing, but it's how we respond to it. Performance
Right.
anxiety is the fight or flight fear response that we get whenever we are standing up in front of a group of people and they're staring at us. There is this primitive part of our brain, the amygdala, which says, you're in danger, you might die. And so
Oh.
yes, so no, it's very primitive, completely unsuited to concert situations, very suited to if you've fallen into the tiger cage at the zoo. But, in a concert, we're not going to die. But nevertheless, this response comes, and the adrenaline, we get that the digestive system shuts down, which means that we often feel nausea or butterflies, dry mouth,
Dry
sweat.
mouth. Yes.
Your heart rate increases, which is why you feel like your heart is pumping out of your chest. Your breath rate increases to oxygenate your muscles, so you're going to be really ready to run away or hit something. You sweat a lot, and that's so that your body is cooling you down, so you're also ready to run away or hit something. Your pupils dilate, so your peripheral vision becomes better to perceive threats from anywhere, which is not helpful if you're trying to read semiquavers. And also, the other thing that happens is that cortisol in your brain releases extra sugar so you can think faster, which can actually be really helpful, except that, and unless you see it as helpful, your brain just goes to every catastrophic danger scenario that might happen, from, vomiting on stage, blood nose, tripping over the mic cord, you name it. Your brain thinks of it. Have I left the iron on at home? Random intrusive thoughts. And so the difference between this response and generalized anxiety disorder or panic disorder or any of these other anxiety disorders is the minute the audience goes away, the response stops. And that's what makes it performance anxiety. So
Right.
if you've got a student who has anxiety in a plethora of situations, that's not performance anxiety. And they probably need to get psych help with dealing with that level of anxiety, because it's not comfortable to live with. And no one
No.
should have to live with it.
No.
Whereas performance anxiety is literally in that situation where you know you're backstage or in front of a camera, or you know you're being scrutinized by others, and that primitive response is triggered. Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting because I have worked in a number of different contexts, and working in a band became second nature for me. I've worked in front of the Prime Minister at the time, the Governor General, like a lot of, I've done TV work. But there were occasions such as if I was the main act or support act to an international artist where there were literally thousands of people, I would get this, all those things that you described, except one you didn't describe was I pee a lot. And I understand that comes from fight or flight mode, and that's the body getting rid of everything it can so it can run as fast as it can.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's just all part of
it. But as soon as I sang, and I was very clever in the way that I would work out my set. So my first song was always something that had a big, like if I was working with a 15-piece band, it would always be a big band number, big intro, up tempo, get on there, release all the energy I could expel in that first song, and I would be fine.
Exactly.
So I found my way of dealing with it. Then though, this is the next stage of, so I started to find ways to overcome that. But then public speaking, that is another level. We'll get to that. But I found that really hard to deal with. And I don't know what's worse, staring at a spider who's the size of a dinner plate, or standing up and speaking in front of an audience. But when it comes to performance anxiety, it's not a confidence thing, because clearly people like Barbara Streisand, who have admitted to having huge performance anxiety issues, she would be a very confident singer. Is it perfectionism? Is it what you said, that fight or flight mode where you fear that someone is going to kill you? I mean, how unrealistic is that? But
I know.
Or is it our fear of being judged? Is it our own fear of what can go wrong? I mean, what is it? How do you rationalize it?
Well, that's the thing. That's where it varies. That's where it splits. Some, and it depends where you're at, like how old you are and what culture you're around. Like I've been to some schools where everyone has huge fear of being judged by the rest of the class, and schools can develop that kind of culture. Dare I say, often more confident. Whereas another school I go to, which is more highly academic, they have huge fear of judgment, but it's not each other, it's themselves and the hugely high standards they set themselves.
Perfectionism.
Yeah, that's right. And then you've got other people who just don't like people looking at them, or when you talked about working with the band and how you became very good at that and you developed that strategy, there is a huge amount of evidence. There's a psychologist in Sydney, Professor Diana Kenny, who's done a lot of work with orchestral musicians. And she basically has shown that 60% of performance anxiety is lack of preparation. So the reason, so you have become very comfortable performing with a band situation, but not so comfortable or practiced in a public speaking one. So, and I find that a lot when I'm working with, say, music theatre performers who have to be that kind of triple threat. If they started off life as a dancer, they're often completely fine for dance auditions, or completely fine for their acting auditions. But when it comes to their vocal audition or vice versa, those triggers are much higher because they don't have the same sense of comfort and practice. And
you're so right, because I've worked in a number of situations where I've worked in full-time dance programs teaching dancers how to sing,
Yes.
and they're young adults, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, have cried.
Yes.
They've actually
Yes.
cried. They
Yeah.
would get up on stage and dance naked if you asked them to.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
they'd
right.
have no problems. But ask them to sing one line of a song, they've actually cried.
Yes. And, and I think that comes back a bit to their perfectionism thing that I mean, there's the thing about performing artists generally, but those that excel and become professional performing artists, we all have to be perfectionists to some extent because it takes a huge amount of training and a huge amount of commitment to develop these skills and a huge amount of self-efficacy to work at the skills to get there. And there's these two different types of perfectionism. One which is often commonly called perfectionist concerns, where someone knows where they're at the moment, knows where they want to get, but is really frustrated by the fact that they're not there yet. And usually where they want to be is 5-10 years down the track as far as skill acquisition. So they can't do it. They've set themselves this impossible gap. So every time they perform, they feel like they're letting down everyone that listens to them because they feel like people are expecting this higher level of performance when in fact they're only at this lower level.
Yes.
And that creates huge amounts of tension. And in fact, there was this Australian study of 700 and something musicians between the ages of 6 and 17, and showed that children suffering this kind of perfectionism had much higher rates of musculoskeletal injuries
Oh my goodness.
than those. I know. So it really actually impacts us physically.
Wow.
The second type of perfectionism is what's called perfectionist strivings, where somebody wants to get to that highest level, but every day goes, what can I do today to set that small achievable task that is going to get me that little bit closer? And they just keep doing these incremental tasks and they're never done, but they keep getting closer and closer. And every time they achieve that next little step, they think, oh, I'm doing okay here. And so they think, well, what's the next dusty corner I could dig up? And
Yes.
so, and
That sounds so familiar.
yeah, that's right.
Yes.
And that is, and so most of the time when people complain about and I hear that a lot from teenagers, complain about being perfectionists, it's those that are stuck in that perfectionist concerns mindset, and that becomes paralyzing because they can never win. And
Yes.
you often, and so, with dancers, it can involve a whole lot of eating disorders, vocal phonation problems in singers, a whole range of other issues. Skin conditions is something else that they found in a study of actors. This whole range of, because you basically are setting yourself this goal, which you will never achieve because you can't advance 4 years in a week. None of us can, as much as we'd
Yes.
like to.
Yes. And that whole thing around perfectionism is really interesting. And one thing that I learned when we first went into lockdown last year, last March, and I was listening to a lot of podcasts back then. And one thing I learned about being a perfectionist is that, yeah, procrastination can occur because we're waiting to be perfect before we actually go out and do something. But really, to perfect something means that you actually have to be doing it to
That's right.
perfect it. And that was kind of I know I'm making this about me, but when it came to this podcast, I wasn't really ready to launch. But I thought, you know what? To perfect something means you have to be doing it to perfect it. And so having a change of mindset around that, and even understanding what perfectionism and to be perfect is, can help too.
That's right. And I think that I also think that this whole idea that practice makes perfect, like what is perfect? If you think about the
Mm,
best performances you've ever seen or heard, I bet they weren't perfect. Think of the
no,
best performances you've ever done. I bet they
no.
weren't perfect, but they had this huge emotional connection with what you were doing and how you were able to emotionally connect with your audience. That's
Hmm.
what people are looking for.
Exactly,
You
exactly.
know, we're
It's,
not
yeah,
we're not looking for things that are note perfect, or we want to go to a performance or listen to a performance and think, I've forgotten about my life and the fact that I forgot to do this, or I haven't done that, or my son's just smashed the umbrella stand and the phone, and I just want to be transformed and
yeah.
taken away for a minute. And that and so, you know, practice makes progress. It doesn't
Yes.
actually, yeah.
I heard a wonderful thing when I was going to the conservatorium, and I had Dr. Irene Bartlett as
Mm,
my singing teacher. And she used to teach us that practice makes permanent.
yes.
And I
Yeah.
loved that. And just what you're saying about audiences and about imperfections, when I spoke to Wendy LeBorn, she
Mm,
shared some wonderful things about the uniqueness of voice. And one thing she said is that those imperfections is what makes us unique. That's
mm,
our own story, that's our own experiences. And I think there's a lot of, from what we're just unpacking as we go, there seems to be that we really need to change the mindset around
mm,
so much of this. It's
yeah.
the way people think and they approach performance that really needs to be
Well, I
thought about.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's hard when we're living in this digital age where, if you think back in your and my day when we did our assignments, they looked like pieces of paper, handwritten. Some of them cut
Absolutely.
off halfway and
Yeah.
stapled together at the top as we rearranged paragraphs to
Mhm.
make it. Whereas now they look like published books.
Yes.
Because we have laptops that give all this free images and this formatting and everything. And if you look, we can airbrush ourselves. We can make ourselves look. There's a whole lot of
Yeah.
digital perfectionism we live with that is, it's not real.
Yes. So tell us about some of the people that come to you, because you
Yeah.
not only work with singers, you work with a variety of people from a variety of professions. And what are the main reasons why they're coming to you around that performance anxiety perspective?
Well, in the case of performers, um, most of the time when a performer, um, working performer is coming to see me, it's usually because they've suffered some sort of psychological trauma, because
Wow.
something, they've done a show where they've been cast and maybe miscast. The director cast them, but then really wanted them to be something that they are not. And so they spend the entire working run feeling like they're not living up to the expectations of the rest of the cast and crew. And, it can be, that can be really damaging. Had somebody else who suffered an injury on their hand. As they're a pianist and conductor, and so they worked in music theatre, um, as a pianist and as a conductor, professional shows all around Southeast Asia and Australia, 20 years without any problems. And then they developed this injury in their hand, and all of a sudden they realised, hey, I'm not invincible. Things can
Mm,
go wrong, and so it's yeah. So usually um with older musicians or people that are already working in that, there's something that has
mhm.
triggered this swamping of self-doubt. And
Right.
so then it's a case of working out what was it that triggered that, and rewriting that narrative and creating um, systems around or different thought strategies so that next time you get up and play or perform, you can think differently about how and who you are. So that's whereas I also work with corporate presenters, which I have to say I kind of like, because like most of us as performers, we secretly hate bad performances, don't you?
Yes.
When you see someone get up and waffle, anyway, and I, and it's sort of, and I feel a bit bad sometimes because I think, well, I haven't got the training I have or anything else, but nevertheless, so it started off with, yeah, I started through some, people that knew me said, hey, I think this person would really benefit from some of the stuff you do. They're a bit anxious or whatever. But 90% of the time with corporates, and corporate presenters or people that have to work in that corporate space and be in that position of power and deliver a message, whatever that happens to be, most of the time it's because they don't have the skills.
Right.
So it's a lot about, whereas most performers have the skills to perform well, it's just their brain, their head's getting in the way or what have you. Whereas a lot of the time, they don't have the skills, or they haven't practiced them enough, or they don't see them as being as much value as the content that they have worked and their team has worked hard to produce. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
Yes.
it tends to be more about teaching them how to practice, what they need to be looking for, what an audience wants, who are, things like pace and
Oh,
posture,
yes. Yes.
articulation, being authentic rather than trying to be somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
How to deal with social networking situations if you're somebody who is fantastic at your job, but gets very nervous when you're around people you don't know. Or, yeah, or when, yes. So
And
it's more like,
and
yeah.
what about sports people? Because I know that you teach some sports people as well.
Well, no, actually, I don't
Oh,
teach
you
sports people.
don't?
No, I use a lot of skills from sports psychology,
Oh,
because the
right.
reality
Sorry.
is that
Yes.
thanks to things like the Olympics, there has been far more research onto how to create peak performance under highly pressurized circumstances in sport than there has been in the performing arts. So most,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So most performing arts coaches, counselors, psychologists, we are drawing a lot from sports psychologists. And in fact, there's this fantastic guy called Don Green, who's a bit like the father of performance psychology in some ways. He was an Olympic diving coach, an Olympic for the US team. He coached multiple teams and archery and shooting and all of these things, a huge sports psychologist. And then he was doing this golf clinic, and he's nearing retirement at this point. He's pretty much retired. Does this golf clinic, and this guy comes and does this 4-day golf clinic. Who's a cellist, and Don Green goes, "Hey, I'd love to hear you play." And he says, "Well, I'm doing a concerto with this orchestra. Sure, you can. I'll get you a ticket." And he said, "No, look, I'd really like to stand backstage, see what people do backstage in an orchestral situation." And so Don Green stood backstage, and this cellist, who, is a professional soloist, is standing there shaking like a leaf
Oh my
backstage.
gosh.
And Don Green is going, "Why is this happening? Why has nobody taught you how to do this?" So he then went and spent 2 years sitting in and classes at Juilliard and converting what a lot of sports psychology into classical music
Mm-hmm.
speak, and
Mm-hmm.
developing them for classical musicians. And so from largely his work, yeah, at that sort of,
Yes.
yeah,
So why are we so far behind the eight ball? You talk about sports people, and I know that a lot of high level motivational speakers, such as Anthony Robbins, Brene Brown, Brendan Burchard, they have performance coaches. Why,
yeah.
like, we as performers don't have performance coaches? How did we get lost in the mix?
I don't know. I'm tempted to say funding, which is,
Oh,
I
okay.
mean,
Yes.
yes. I mean, I know that a lot of more sports psychology research is because basically, countries put a lot of money into Olympic teams, particularly countries like the US and Great Britain and so forth. And so that there's a lot of that's fostering research in those areas, and they
Mm.
care about international rugby scores. And
Yes.
um, whereas we don't have concert offs for orchestras around the world, or operas around the world, or dance offs in that kind of in that same kind of way. And I'm not saying it as an excuse. I think
No, I think it's valid.
when you yeah, and I think when you get to levels like if you're making a lot of money, like people like say Beyonce, or some of those superstars, I'm sure they would have performance coaches on their team,
Oh,
but they
yes.
would but they also have employ a big team of people,
Hmm.
whereas the most performing artists work as freelance from one gig to the next, and it's just not in the budget.
It's not in the budget. No, no, that's so true. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty gritty here. Okay, I'm gonna pretend that I
Mm-hmm.
am someone, a performer,
Mm-hmm.
singer,
Mm-hmm.
singing. I'm a rock singer.
Okay.
Okay, I'm a rock singer. I'm coming to you. I am suffering from performance anxiety that is paralyzing me. And I have a gig coming up in a few weeks' time where I'm performing at a big stadium. Obviously, COVID isn't around.
Yes.
And let's
You're
let's
not
just put
showing your
that
vaccine
disclaimer.
passport at
Yeah,
the
yeah.
door.
Let's just throw that into my story. I'm creating a story here, a
Mhm.
character. It's
Mhm.
fictional. Although
Mhm.
some of know used to be a rock singer. Okay,
Mm.
so I come to you. What
Yep.
kind of process and evaluation do you go through? What kinds of questions would you be asking me? And I'll pretend to be that person. Shall we role play?
We can give it. We can give it a go. Okay.
Okay, I've never done
Okay.
this before on the show.
Well, I've never role played with this before, so
Okay,
let's see where it takes us.
this could be really entertaining for our audience. Let's do it.
It could be.
Okay.
Okay. So, what the first question, the first thing I'd say is thanks for coming. Is that good on you for coming and being willing to talk about it and trying to change things, because we you can't change anything unless you try.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing I would talk about is the fact that anything that we say, I'm not going to be getting on the phone and going, you won't believe what just such and such said. So create a
Okay,
safe space
great.
where people know that what they say to me is between them and me, and
Mhm.
it's not going to get taken further. I would then ask them why they're here.
Okay.
Why are you here? What's going on for
I
you that you want to
okay.
change?
Okay. So what I found has happened that is that before going on stage, I am suffering from dry mouth, I'm peeing a lot, a real lot. That I'm shaking, I have sweaty palms, my heart rate is up, I'm finding that I'm breathing high up in the chest. And when I get on stage, it's not stopping. I can't seem to overcome all those physical and those voices in my head telling me that this is a really scary and I'm feeling fearful.
Okay. So, and I'm just going to, in light of the fact you're about to do a stadium concert,
Mm-hmm.
have you, has this always been like that?
It seems to have gotten worse as I've gotten older. When I was
Right.
younger, I felt I was fine. I felt I could conquer the world. I don't know, as I'm getting older, maybe my expectations are changing of myself, or maybe I've become more aware of the fact that perhaps people are more judgmental, or I feel they are more so than what they used to be. And so these kinds of thoughts are going through my mind.
And have you perhaps what the idea that people are becoming more judgmental? Have you got any external um, uh, evidence that that is happening?
No.
Have you had some bad review? No. So this is something. It's not that you're um, getting poorer reviews or getting told by people around you that you're not living up to your name or what you've achieved.
No, it
So
seems to
the
be
question,
something is it just seems to be something that I'm feeling. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit more vulnerable, or maybe I'm feeling a little more self-conscious than what I used to.
yeah. So what else has been? So when did you notice this start to change? How long ago?
Aha. You know what? It started to happen when I hit 40.
Right.
And
And
mhm. And my voice started to become a
yes,
little unstable.
right, right. So it sort of started in that perimenopause time. And
Yes.
do you
Yes.
think that, yeah, so you're changing because I'm just wondering what else was going on because we don't if you've got a skill that you have done time and time and time again successfully, we don't suddenly start doubting that unless something is going on
Hmm.
that is making us doubt that. So that is
Yes.
either happening because something externally people are telling us that something, but it sounds like to me that you were going through a period of time where things were changing that you were finding unsettling.
Yes. And
Would that be
probably,
true?
yes. And probably I hadn't related the two together because things started to happen where my pitch was becoming a little unreliable. I was finding it was taking me longer to warm up. Things were not the same as
Hmm.
before
Yeah.
with my voice.
No, no, no. And so, um, how long ago was that?
Oh,
So
last
if that
year.
started,
I'm 41
right,
now.
okay. You're 41 now. So
Yes.
how have you found, and so has those things started to settle down as far as your vocal assuredness? Is that sort of more settled now? Or are you still struggling with that?
I'm still struggling with probably confidence. It's probably,
Mm.
you know
And
what?
but
It's, yeah, it is probably a confidence issue.
so it's not, your voice has settled down. You're no longer having pitch problems. Your Do you feel like your voice is back to where it was or different to where it was? Are you happy with your voice?
Not quite how it used to be, but I think I'm starting to learn to navigate around some of those things. But even so, I am still a little bit
Mm,
anxious.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
kind of thrown
and
me a
that is
little bit.
completely normal.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
because you had something that you,
yeah. So, what I was
yeah,
going
so
to
because you had
say,
something that you could rely on.
yeah, okay. So if I was that person, if I was a real, well, I am a real life person, but a real person coming to see you. Um,
You are.
okay,
Yes, this
I am real.
fictitious character.
Yeah. If I was that person, what, other than those questions, what kind of strategy, would you have a strategy around that?
Yeah, I would talk about so I think in a case like that, you've got two things going on. One is there are some very real problems going on, and if you ignore the fact that there are real problems, the minute something goes wrong with the voice or it doesn't do what you expect in performance, no calming down tool in the world is going to help. You're going to be going, what is going on? What am I going to do? That panic is going to set in,
Yes.
So I think, so you've got these two strategies going on. One, you need to address the unreliable voice, and you need to work out with it, not necessarily with me, but work with the client to help them gain that vocal confidence again. So whether they need to go back and see another teacher or see a teacher that specializes or get some HRT or whatever it happens to be, so that they're actually dealing with a reliable instrument. It's like a violinist working with a violin that they know that the bridge keeps collapsing.
Yes.
How can you play confidently in that? You can't.
Exactly. Yes.
You can't. So that, you've got to deal with that. And then I'd probably talk about what used to work to come to get that, backstage. As you talked about, you had developed this backstage protocol that allowed you to get on stage, walk on confidently, sing your big number, and get on with the show. So most performers with that kind of experience, if they've been playing, are going to have some strategies that work for them. And so then work to strengthen those strategies, maybe find out if some of those strategies that used to work in the past, they've forgotten to use, or they need to try something else, so it
Yes.
would just, yeah. So
Okay. And when you talk about backstage protocols, I know some singers have some really weird protocols, if you want to call them.
yeah,
I would probably call
yeah,
them rituals.
yes,
So there is some benefit of those. Yes.
absolutely, absolutely. Look at Nadal. He walks on the tennis court. He has 2 hours of rituals before he comes on the court. Then he
Yes.
comes on. He gets out his water and orange juice bottles and lines up the labels the same direction. And when he walks on the tennis court the first time, he doesn't step on the lines because that would be bad luck. He has a ridiculous number of
Okay.
rituals that he does, but it has not stopped him being a highly successful tennis player. And
Yes,
they have done
absolutely.
studies where they got, and basketball is has become known for having a series of rituals around different things. And so they did do some studies with basketballers trying to get them to get rid of these superstitious rituals, and their playing went downhill. And
Really?
it's just because, it makes a difference because it gives comfort and feelings of control to the person who's doing those rituals. Now, somebody like me who can barely remember the color of their own eyes and never notices anything, finds any kind of meticulous ritual like it's just something else I have to think about. That doesn't work for me. But on
Yes.
the other hand, I do have other students and know other colleagues that have highly meticulous rituals that allow them to feel in control. So with one of my favorite ones reading about was this a male solo ballet dancer, and he backstage he describes he's sitting there and he's got his shoes on, he's got all his clothes on, and he's sitting there and he just wants to go home, and he just wants to go home, and he's done his warm up and he just wants to go home, and then he has a coffee and a chocolate muffin, and then he's good to go. Now,
A coffee and a chocolate muffin.
chocolate muffin. I know.
I would
Not
have
what
that.
you.
I had water. Where was my chocolate muffin and my
He
coffee?
wasn't trying to sing, Marissa.
Okay.
And he was about to dance his little bottom off for the next 3 hours, so he's going to burn off all those calories. But, there's so many stories of people having these, what are completely nonsensical rituals, but they mean something to them, and they provide that anchoring for them.
Yes.
And, and
Yeah.
that's we are all unique.
I have to tell you
glorious.
my little story about a student that I had, and this is when I was teaching at a dance studio, and they were doing a song and dance, and it was to the Dream Girls song One Night Only. And one of the girls had to start off, and it was the version that starts off slowly and goes really quickly. And she came to me and she said, I can't sing. I'm so scared and my throat's hurting. And I was fine. It wasn't hurting before and now it's hurting really badly. I thought, how do I deal with this? And I looked in my handbag and I had a packet of Fisherman's Friends lollies,
Great.
right? And I broke one in half and I said, you only need half. But if you have this, honestly, it's going to fix your throat. It won't be permanent, but it'll be long enough for you to get through the song. I said, I promise you.
Yes.
And because it tastes so bad,
Yeah.
and anything bad that tastes bad has to be good for you, she believed me and she smashed it. And then the next to Stedford, she came up to me and I knew it was going to happen. So I packed a packet of Fisherman's Friends. Do you have any of those lollies in your bag? And it became a thing. They don't do anything, but that became her thing.
No.
And she overcame.
That's right.
She overcame the anxiety performance just by this worst tasting thing that cleared out every nostril, you know, and every fiber.
They're horrible.
Yeah, but it worked. So yeah, I see what you mean. Have you ever had anyone come to you that has been so paralyzed with performance anxiety that they've needed medication?
No, I haven't personally. And I suspect, and I don't want to swear on anything because we are all different, and that's not to say that somebody, but I suspect anyone that becomes that paralyzed, you're actually dealing with PTSD from
Right.
from sort of trauma. And there's certainly some tools that you can use to help with PTSD, but if the trauma's been significant enough, then sometimes people need some medication to stop that that neurological pathway that the brain has learnt is the safe way to go down when they're in that, like, that is an extreme situation. So
yes,
look, but I've never tried to treat Barbara Streisand or anyone who's suffered extreme performance in that over for such a long period of time. And so I can't say that's true for everyone. I just
yes.
but
And what about things like meditation, tapping, mindfulness practices? What do you think about that as a way to help people? Do you think there's value in those?
absolutely there is value in those, just not for me. And that is because the one of the things that is less known about performance anxiety is that in the 1990s there was this guy called Hannon who did all this research into individual zones of optimal functioning, where basically he looked at how, if you think of adrenal activation as not being a negative anxiety provoking thing, just as something like if you've just won a race, you are going to be highly activated. Or if you're asleep, you're going to be very chilled. And so if you think of an activation scale as 0 being asleep, 50 you're just schlepping around during the day, and 100 you're partying and dancing and having a great time, or you've won the lotto, highly activated. So these are not positive or negative things. They're just the amount of activation level.
Yes.
It used to be assumed that most people did their best work when their activation level was about 70, a bit higher than normal, but not extreme. And his work basically found that only worked for 50% of the population. They wanted to be a bit activated, but if they got too high, then their functioning went down. They weren't able to shoot as accurately or, perform their artistic gymnastics as accurately, what have you. But there was another 25% that did their best work when their activation level was really high, really pumped. And then there's another 25% that do their best work when their activation's really low, like 30 to 40. So if you are somebody like me whose activation, I do my best work when my activation level's about 85, 95, like really pumped, which probably explains why in high school, yeah, you and me are
I'm like that.
you know, I
Yes.
got I got so nervous and was so shaking, but I could still do it. Probably explains that. So things like meditation, mindfulness, Tai Chi, all of that meditative calming stuff just before I perform just makes me itchy. It doesn't allow me to perform well. I'm better.
Yes.
I I know I get very nervous, so I know that I need to not be around people, because if I'm
Yes.
around too many other people,
Hmm.
then I become extreme. And so I maintain that high activation without going off the edge by one of the things. And that's one of the interesting things. I did a study looking at what performing artists did backstage. And while some people need to be with others, others need to be alone.
That's me.
But like that's with that, yeah. Whereas with the breathing, etc., if you are somebody who does your best work when you're super calm and super chilled, then things like breathing, slow meditation, relaxation, yoga, Tai Chi, any of those kind of things that actually slow down your breath and actually slow down your activation level to lower than normal are going to be far more helpful. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. No,
So,
so I suppose that comes down to personality type almost. Yeah.
yeah.
And we
Yeah. Yeah.
as,
Well,
yeah, go on, sorry.
no, I was just going to say, I mean, and that's one of the biggest journeys I think about learning to manage performance anxiety is knowing yourself. If
Mm.
you know you need to be really chilled or really hyped, then you can manage your nerves around that. But if you don't, that's a big thing that I work on, particularly with teenagers, because they have no idea
Yes, yes.
most of the time.
And look, to be perfectly honest, and I'll put it out there, I get nervous before interviews, right? And and sometimes I get a little cranky with myself, but I've justified why I do. I go, you're being stupid. But to me, why I do, and I understand why, it actually has nothing to do with, well, it does have something to do with me, but more so about the guest, because I want to be sure that in my responsibility to that person, that I give them the best opportunity I possibly can for them to be amazing. So I bear you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So it's not about, oh, am I going to sound rubbish? But am
Hmm.
I going to do the best I can for that person so they're at their best? And that's why I get nervous.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
right.
yeah, and I get a bit cranky, but then I think it's because I care. So you kind of have to go
Hmm.
through a process, don't you, where you break it down and you understand
Hmm.
why it's happening. And like
Yeah.
clearly, once I get started, you can see, like, I'm at home here. This is great. I could talk all day to my guests, and we have fun. Well, I have fun. I don't know about the guests, but um, but you know, so obviously that's got to work for me to a certain extent. Now, coming down to us as teachers, as people in the voice
Hmm.
community, and we have students that come to us. They may have an exam where they're having to sing because they're at college, university, and they have a performance coming up. They're suffering from performance anxiety. What can we do to help our students?
Okay, so one of the first things I always, as teachers, we have to be the rock. We have to be unemotional. That anxiety is contagious. You know, in your own life, if you've had a great day at work and you walk in the door and one member of the family is running around really anxious, all of a sudden everybody in the
Mm-hmm.
family is snapping at each other and feeling anxious.
Yes,
And it's the
yes.
same with your students and your studio. If you have a student that has got this coming exam or audition, and you think they're not going to do well. And so you are quietly feeling a bit anxious for them. Telling them that you're feeling anxious for them is actually not going to help.
Oh no.
It's not going to help anyone. So you just have to, so whether you think they're going to do brilliantly or whether you've got to stick with the facts and be very much about that skill acquisition task focus. There was a recent study like only a couple of months ago with dancers where they've showed that teachers that were able to remain in that task orientated thing, like small incremental steps. This is what you need to do next. When you've got ticked that off, then you do this and so forth. They actually act as a buffer against students who have perfectionist concerns. And
Right.
and if you've got a teacher, if you've got a student who's got all these perfectionist concerns, and if you've got a teacher that also works with an ego-related culture and ramps up those perfectionist concerns, this person is much more likely to get sick or burn out. Whereas if you've got a teacher with this task-orientated, calm, really, I'm sorry that sounds distressing for you. What I think you need to do next is this could be helpful. What do you think about this as being your next helpful step? If you've got a teacher like that, it's shown, they actually found in this study, you have less cases of anorexia, you have less burnout, less
Mm.
dropout, higher student engagement. And so that's a sort of a global answer.
Right.
What I do as a teacher with my students, if they've got a big thing coming up, first, before it is, particularly if they're going for a role. Now, this is probably different if you have people doing this as a profession, okay, because the answers change. But
Mm-hmm.
I get them to articulate to me how their life is going to change if they get that role. What is going to change if they get that A plus? What is going to change in their life if they get that A? List all the things. Now tell me what is going to change if you fail. What is going to change if you don't get that role? And the things that matter in a teenager's life are things like, are they still going to have a roof over their head? Are they still going to get fed? Are their family still going to love them? Is their boyfriend still going to love them? All of that. None of that changes. Those
No.
things that really matter
Mm-hmm.
do not change. And so that can be a really powerful tool to put a break on that teenage catastrophizing stage. If you're dealing with adult performers who may have their own family and getting the role makes the difference of being able to pay the mortgage or not, that becomes profoundly different and probably not a great question, nearly as good a question. The but in that situation, the reality is that if you get 1 out of 20 auditions, then you're actually doing better than most. And every time you don't get that role or you don't get that audition means that you're one audition closer to getting that next one.
Absolutely.
And the reality is it's a really tough business we work in.
Yeah.
And the two things that I think teachers can really help with is after performances or auditions or whatever, before they get results, if possible, just ask your student to articulate what they think they did well in that audition, even if it just meant they got through the piece and didn't fall over the furniture and cry, whatever it is they feel they did well. And then what would they change for next time to make their next audition or performance better?
Yeah.
Because whatever performance we do, there are always something that we think, oh, wasn't too awful. I did that bit okay. But then there's where you come off stage and you think, must remember to wait before I come in the third, there's always little things that you want to change. Doesn't matter how many years
Absolutely.
you've been performing. And
Yes.
but those questions are really task related. They're not saying, I was a genius, I did so well, or I was crap. It's about what did you, I'm not asking you how you felt. I'm asking what you did well and what would you like to work on to make your next performance better. And that's all we
Yeah.
can do.
Yes. So the two takeaways that I have from that, one is offering a strategy prior to
Mm,
performance and perspective, and
mm,
then after the performance, perspective again. So it's putting things into some sort of order in the grand
yeah,
scheme of life, so
yeah,
to speak.
that- yeah, and it's about keeping them about essentially as teachers we're providing skill acquisition. We're not. Um, this is not magic. This is not.
Mm,
We're not. You felt great about a performance. That's wonderful, but it doesn't help you do better next time. You felt terrible about a performance. I'm sorry about that, but that doesn't help you do better next time. You
yes.
know, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
So in wrapping the interview up, you've been so generous with your time and we've covered a lot. What's the best piece of advice you could offer a singing teacher then when a student comes to them? I know you've just answered that you've given so much. Is there
mm,
another little, what's that, if it was one thing, what would you say to them?
listen.
Ah,
You
love
know,
it. Love
yeah,
it.
yeah. I read this book by a violin teacher who taught Isaac Stern and all these people at Juilliard, Dorothy DeLay. And one of the line I remember from reading her book, she says, "I've learned as a teacher to be silent." And I think, um, yeah, that if we can listen
Mm-hmm.
to people,
Mm-hmm.
then we can respond and help them be the best performer they can be, and we can help give them the direction they need. Because it's at the end of the day, as a teacher, sadly, it's all about them. We're no longer the diva.
Yes, yes. And um, when I was interviewing Nadine Mannion,
Mm,
she she said something that I thought, you've just said this so perfectly, and I don't think you realized what you just said. And she said, people before the voice.
yes, yes,
And
yeah,
that part of that is listening,
mm.
listening to what the student needs, and yes, all of that. So 100%. I think Sarah Marshall for president.
No, no way. I couldn't.
So,
Oh,
Sarah,
yes.
aside from becoming president, what are you up to in the future? What's Sarah doing in the future?
In the future,
Have
well,
you any future projects or
I
things you're
do.
working on?
I've always got projects, Marissa. If you know me, I've always.
Yeah.
No, my current project is I'm planning on launching in September a website called Performing Arts PD, which is going to be a portal for performing arts educators' professional development that is specific, industry specific. And so I've actually asked Nadine Mannion to contribute a course on how to create transgender safety in a secondary or tertiary environment. I've written some courses there about performance anxiety and mastering performance anxiety for student wellbeing, as well as, elite tips and tricks, some of them more for peak performance. I've got other people writing courses on how to conduct bands and core strength for dancers, who's by a woman who's both a physiotherapist and runs a dance school. And yeah, it's going to have a wide range of hopefully interesting subjects, because in New South Wales anyway, you are mandated to do, as teachers, 100 hours of professional development every 5 years, but there is nothing out there that is specific for performing arts educators. And I think that really needs to change. It's something I feel so passionate about because we
Excellent.
have so much fantastic knowledge to share. So
Yes.
we should.
And so what date is that being launched in
It's going
September?
to be in September, a date to be um, decided. Um,
Okay.
I'm planning to launch it early September, but I haven't set a deadline for myself yet
Okay.
because I want
Well,
it to be right.
keep us posted. All right.
Yeah,
So we're going to put all the links where people can find you in
great.
our show notes. And I just
Yeah.
want to say a big thank you for all the information that you've shared with us. It's been a lot of fun as well. Sorry about the role playing.
Oh no, that was particularly fun.
I could do that all day. Who would you like me to be now?
I know.
I could be Bubbles.
You
Anyway,
could.
I could.
No, that's
But thank you,
great. Thank you
Sarah.
very much
You've been
for the
awesome.
opportunity.
You're a
Yeah,
champion,
fun.
and Sarah for
Too.
president. And
Take care.
we'll look forward to you launching your professional development site.
I will. I'll keep you
Good luck
posted.
with that. Thank you. See you later.